It's right after Nahum and right before Zephaniah, if that helps at all. Yeah. Well, today we are going to be starting actually a mini-series on the book of Habakkuk. And I am going to call it Habakkuk. And you may call it Habakkuk. That would be wrong, but I won't knock down any points if you do that. Here, I got to find Habakkuk. I got a bookmark in there. Good. Okay. But why Habakkuk? Well, I actually think there's a couple of reasons. One is I had to preach on something, so why not? Secondly, how many sermons have I heard in the minor prophets growing up? Probably very few. Thirdly, one is just the fact that I think Habakkuk actually may be one of the most relevant books in the Old Testament for 2020. I think there's a lot here that we can learn from, that we can glean from, that we can see how the Lord's hand is at work, even in some very unstable sorts of times that we live in. I don't think it's any secret or anything that most people disagree with that 2020 has been one of the most incredibly strange years of probably most of our lifetimes, has it not? I mean, the year started off with a lot of political strife, and that was taken up by the news in January and February. Then in March, we had COVID, and we had lockdowns, that nothing we have ever done like in my lifetime, and I'm sure most of your lifetimes as well. And then we had the George Floyd incident, which led to a lot of civil unrest, and it led to a lot of, in some cases, in many cities, riots across the nation in major cities. And that's kind of continued on through all summer. I did see things in the news about somewhere in California, somebody got bit by a flea, and now the first case of the plague in so many years. And then there was other things on the news of killer bees. And now we have an election where both sides are saying that the huge future of democracy in the world is hinges on this election. And then, as I mentioned last week, I just think this is very interesting, that the day before the election, an asteroid may hit the Earth. So that would just seem to wrap up the year really well if we would finish it off that year. And also, I think for most of us who are kind of biblically in tune and concerned about the state of Christianity in the world and in America specifically, we have seen a rapid social decline and moral decline in our nation in the past 10 or 15 years, just in rapid form. And so what we're seeing here is a very changing world, an unstable world, in some ways a kind of a scary world, and knowing what is in our future, what is ahead. I made the passing reference to saying what chapter of Revelation, but that's been a meme going around. What chapter of Revelation are we living out this week? You know, and it seems like that at times. I think of all those pastors, and I only did one. But the 2020 vision for 2020, they started off the year. Well, that went out the window. I mean, the whole year was nothing like they thought it was going to be. Well, I bring that up because Habakkuk speaks of a time not exactly identical to ours, but he is also in a time in which there is a very instability within the nation of Judah. And there is a tremendous number of questions about what is ahead and what does their future look like. The book of Habakkuk helps us in this time of instability, when the winds of the culture are blowing and we're feeling a little unstable on our feet. It helps us to put down some stakes to help us weather these sorts of storms. Some theological frameworks, some biblical frameworks, some ideas about God that are going to help us weather the cultural winds, the instability, the worry, the anxiety that we have. And it shows us how we move from that of fear and frustration to that of faith. And that's what I love about the book of Habakkuk. This guy starts off, as we're going to see today, lots of questions, lots of wonderings, lots of fears, lots of, I don't know how this is going to go, God. And then by the end of the book, he makes, I think, one of the most striking affirmations of confidence and faith in God no matter what. And you see that progression within him. And I'm hoping that progression, if you are at a spot feeling a little fearful, anxiety, uncertain, unstable, that it'll also help you in the process to gain some footing, some stability. So that maybe you'll be able to even say what Habakkuk did in the very end, that he will trust the Lord no matter what comes his way. And so before we get into this, I want to pray. But we're going to be looking just at two stakes we can stick in the ground today from this passage in Habakkuk chapter 1. Let's pray and we'll get into this. Father, as we start to read your word and to digest it a bit, I pray, Father, that you would help us to receive it and to understand it. We know that that is something we need your grace and help for as well. So I pray and ask, Father, that you would help us just to be open and receptive. I pray, Lord, that you would change us in these 3 or 4 weeks here that we're in this book of Habakkuk. I pray that you'd help us if we have any lingering fears, whether it's nationwide fears or if it's personal fears, just to press in and to confidently affirm by the end of this our faith and our trust in you, that you've got us no matter what. And I pray and ask that you'd open our hearts today. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, I'm just going to read this passage section by section for us, because if you've ever read the prophetic writings, sometimes there's a lot of kind of strange language, strange imagery, and I think we need to take it section by section here. So the first stake that we see is in verses 1 through 4, where here we must learn the prayer of complaint or lament. Notice verse 1. It says, "The oracle that Habakkuk the prophet saw. O Lord, how long shall I cry for help, and you will not hear? Or cry to you violence, and you will not save? Why do you make me see iniquity? Why do you idly look at wrong? Destruction and violence are before me. Strife and contention arise. So the law is paralyzed, and justice never goes forth. For the wicked surround the righteous, so justice goes forth perverted." Let's stop there. Notice, if you didn't read that, and maybe you read this already this week and looked at it, but did you read that and just think to yourself, Habakkuk, I appreciate your honesty, but boy, that seems a little raw. That seems a little bit over the line. Maybe you wanted to come alongside and say, whoa, brother, whoa. Do you know who you're talking to that you're saying these kinds of things to? It's almost like Habakkuk is the soldier in the Lord's army, and he says, permission to speak freely here. Be at ease, soldier. Tell me what you're really thinking here. And I don't think that he's crossing the line, but he's surely coming close to pushing it. He says in verse 2, the first part, he's crying out for help, and he doesn't say, God, you must not have heard me. The message must not have got lost in the mail somewhere. Notice he says it much more direct and even confrontational than that. He says, you will not hear. And he says, you cry out, you violence, and you will not save. And then in verse 3, he says, you make me look at sin, iniquity. Why don't you do something about it? It's as if he's saying to God, you're absent on duty. This is your job. You're not hearing my cries. You're not saving when violence is all in the world. You're failing us, God. And then in verse 4, he says, so the law is, my translation says paralyzed. Some will say ineffective. It could even just mean in the Hebrew like numb. Like when you wake up in the middle of the night and your hand, it's like, whose hand is on my chest? Oh, it's mine. It's just numb from falling asleep. It's like it's completely ineffective. The law of God, which was supposed to be done by the kings and enforced by the kings and the leadership, it's not being enforced. And so what you end up having is a law that just sits there dormant and paralyzed, unable to create justice and create order within society. And he goes on to say here that it's the wicked are surrounded by the righteous, and so the justice goes forth perverted. Now, I got to say that I read those things, and I look at some places in our nation right now, and I think, well, that sounds kind of like what we're seeing today. Violence, destruction, and yet, who's doing anything about it? It seems like not enough people doing anything about it. Well, what Habakkuk, just to give you a little bit of a history lesson here to set the scene for the next couple of weeks, is going through a season here in which he is feeling tremendously disappointed in life and in what he's experiencing. I'll give you a little map here for a history lesson as well. Probably the year in which Habakkuk is giving this prophecy is somewhere in the years of 609 to 605 BC. So a long time ago, we might say. But this is just after King Josiah died. Remember that King Josiah in the Old Testament came to the throne when he was 8 years old, and he ruled for 31 years, and he was an incredible, wonderful king who did right in righteousness in the eyes of God. The years of Josiah were years of spiritual renewal, spiritual restoration. They were years in which things were going very well in the land of Israel. Remember the story. They're doing a little temple cleanup day, and somebody finds the book of the law in there, and it's like they discovered something they hadn't seen in a good long time. It's kind of like you might go into a church and they're doing a church cleanup and saying, what is this book with this leather on it? I don't understand. Well, let's read it. Well, they read the law to the king, and Josiah is so distraught that they have wandered from God so dreadfully that he tears his clothes and he carries out a systematic reform upon the nation. Also, I believe, because of the providence of God, there was also relative peace in the land of Judah during that time as well. And so if you look on the map here, you can see that the Babylonians and the Assyrians and the Egyptians were the three power players, so to speak, powerful nations of those years. And for some reason during that time, the Babylonians were pushing up to the Assyrians and fighting them on that front. The Assyrians had been coming down towards Israel and actually destroyed the northern nation of Israel. But they had gotten distracted now by the Babylonians. And the Egyptians, they didn't do anything. They just stayed in Egypt because, they're big enemies to the north. The Assyrians are distracted anyway. So what it meant is that it was an incredible time of spiritual renewal and relative political peace in the land of Judah, in that southern part of what we would say the nation of Israel. And so this is some good years that Habakkuk has seen. But then in 609 BC, Josiah dies in battle. He dies by trying to fend off the Egyptians. We don't know why exactly he went into that battle, but he did. And he died fighting off the Egyptians in 609 BC. Immediately afterwards, the people of Judah selected his son Jehoahaz to be the king of Israel, and he was rotten to the core. He only reigned for 3 months. Then the Egyptians came up and decided they didn't want him reigning there, so they removed him. And they set up instead Josiah's other son by the name of Jehoiakim, and he served as an Egyptian vassal, or a puppet king, we would say. He did what the Egyptians wanted. He was just a figure that kind of gave them some sense that they had their own land, but really they didn't. But what we know about Jehoiakim as well is that he was an incredibly evil man, an incredibly evil king. And what happened was evil, once again, reigned in the land. Now Habakkuk has seen the light of Josiah's reign. He has seen the fall into the darkness of Jehoiakim's reign. And he sees it all, and so this is why he is complaining. This is why he's crying out for renewal. He has seen better days than this. He knows it can be better than this in Israel. God, why don't you hear us? Why don't you take out Jehoiakim? Why don't you put in another Josiah? Is probably what a lot of his prayers were all about. And he complains to God, and he laments to God in prayer for renewal. Now, some will see this as a sign of weak faith of Habakkuk. Shouldn't he just trust the Lord, be happy, say, it's going to be good, it's going to be great? No. He laments, he complains, but it's not out of a weakness of his faith that he does it. It's out of a strong faith that he does it. He knows that God can do something about this. And God alone can do something about this. And so he cries out to God for renewal, and he's getting frustrated because God isn't doing anything about it. It's kind of like when you have some complaint about a store, maybe in Walmart or Target or something, and something happens, who do you go to? The employee ticks you off, treats you the way you shouldn't be, or you get a bad product. You say, I want to see the manager. I want to talk to somebody who can do something about this. That's what Habakkuk is doing. Out of his great faith in the God of Israel, he has seen him do great things. He goes straight to God and says, do something, God. Fix this. Renew us. Set up a good king. Set up a righteous kingdom. And I think we would do well to learn from Habakkuk's example. The prayer of lament and complaint is all over the Psalms. It's given to us in the Holy Scriptures as one form of prayer that we can do towards God. And it does not come from a grateful spirit, but a desire to see God glorified and to see spiritual renewal in our land. And we sometimes can lift up some of those concerns rightfully in the prayer of lament and complaint. When you see someone like your kid or a good friend of yours fervently following the Lord and now they're wandering from their faith, you cry out for them. Lord, do something. When you see a nation that's been overcome like ours with secularism over the number of years that we've seen, we cry out. We lament. Please, Lord, do something. Please fix this. When you see that churches in the country are no longer fearlessly and faithfully proclaiming the truth of Scripture, you can offer a complaint to God. God, do something. Discipline these churches so that they come back to your word and give you glory and honor. Complaints and laments should not be a sustained thing. If you're constantly complaining to God in prayer, and that's the only form of prayer you do, you got a problem. You need the U-turn. I'm complaining, but I'm coming back around to say, but I will trust you. And that's where Habakkuk finally finds himself. But the how long, O Lord, prayers can be a tremendous act of faith. It speaks of somebody who refuses to walk away from God in the midst of frightening circumstances and says, you're it, God, so I come to you, I wrestle with you in prayer and ask for you to rescue us out of this. So one of the things I think that God gives to us as a means of keeping us staked firmly into the ground of our faith, even when the culture winds are blowing, is this prayer of lament, as we learn to cry out to God, the only one who can rescue us. But then there's a second stake in the ground that we need for spiritual and emotional stability as well, and that's in verses 5 through 17, where we find out that we must remind ourselves that God is always at work, even if in ways we don't fully understand. Notice verse 5. Habakkuk is praying, then God answers in verse 5. Look among the nations and see and wonder. Be astounded. For I am doing a work in your days that you would not believe if told. For behold, I'm raising up the Chaldeans, also known as the Babylonians, that bitter and hasty nation, who march through the breadth of the earth to seize dwellings not their own. They are dreaded and fearsome. Their justice and dignity go forth from themselves. Their horses are swifter than the leopards and more fierce than the evening wolves. The horsemen press proudly on. The horsemen come from afar and fly like an eagle, swift to devour. They all come for violence. All their faces forward. They gather captives like sand. At kings they scoff. At rulers they laugh. They laugh at every fortress, for they pile up earth and take it. Then they sweep by like the wind and go on. Guilty men whose might is their own God. Now it's interesting here that when Habakkuk was crying out in his lament or his complaint to God about the sin within the nation of Judah, I doubt this was the kind of answer he was looking for. Habakkuk probably didn't expect God to answer him quite in this way. How would God deal with the sins of Judah? Well, verse 6, I'm going to raise up the Chaldeans and the Babylonians who are going to punish you. This would be kind of like a divine mic drop. How in the world could God possibly do this? At this moment, Babylon, of course, is up in the northern part there, and they probably heard things about Babylon, and they got some messages, but they seem like a very distant threat. At this point, it seems like it's like a thunderstorm that's on the horizon. The other night, we were over at the Bay Logs for fish fry they had us over there. We could hear the thunder coming across the lake, and we kept saying, we better go inside. We better maybe get in the car. And finally, just as we got in the car, it really started to come down. But at this point, the Babylonians are just like that. Just a distant thunderstorm, something coming their way. But that God would use these evil people for his purposes would have absolutely shocked Habakkuk. That God could use them to punish his own people, of all people, is remarkable. Verse 6 and 7, it says there that they're thieves. They steal other people's property. They sweep through the land. Verse 7, I like the NIV's translation of it the best here. It says, they are a law unto themselves. Verses 8 and 9, they're a military powerhouse. Their horses are as swift as leopards, as fierce as wolves. Like an eagle swoops in. That's how their army is. It's just right around the corner. They can get you. It says that they grab prisoners as easily as you'd go on the beach and grab a hand of sand. Just easy for them to take up and steal those people away. Verses 10 and 11, he says they're so powerful that they mock other kings and rulers. They laugh at the fortified cities and they worship their own military strength. And in verse 5, Habakkuk, he says 4 words in there. Look among the nations, see, wonder, be astounded, for I'm doing a work in your days that you would not believe if told. But this is what every biblical Christian should believe to be true. That God can use even evil people to turn events, a bad turn of events, to accomplish his redemptive purposes in our lives. Sometimes God uses sickness to wake us up and to teach us to number our days or to serve Him fully. Sometimes God uses difficult workers to be like a 80 grit sandpaper to sand you off just a little bit and some of those sharp edges under your character. Sometimes God uses hard work situations to teach us to trust Him more. God uses evil groups to bring discipline and judgment upon even less evil groups at times. And it is a reminder that God is always at work in our lives, and that is what helps us stay anchored when the wind of tragedy and trial and cultural change would threaten our faith. But Habakkuk, notice in verse 12, he's not exactly happy about this. He can't figure it out. He says, "Are you not everlasting, O Lord, my God, my Holy One? We shall not die. O Lord, you have ordained them as a judgment. And you, O Rock, have established them for reproof. You who are of pure eyes than to see evil and cannot look at wrong. Why do you idly look at traitors and remain silent when the wicked swallows up the man more righteous than he? You make mankind like the fish of the sea, like crawling things that have no ruler. He brings all of them up like a hook. He drags them out with his net. He gathers them in the dragnet. He rejoices and is glad. Therefore he sacrifices to his net and makes offerings to his dragnet. For by them he lives in luxury, and his food is rich. Is he then to keep on emptying his net and mercilessly killing nations forever?" See, what Habakkuk is struggling with is, you're an eternal God, you're a holy God. How can you use wicked people to accomplish your purposes? How can you allow wicked people to actually destroy those more righteous than them? That's what verse 13 is all about. You whose eyes are pure to see evil and cannot look at wrong. Why do you idly look at traitors and remain silent when the wicked swallows up the man more righteous than he? Well, we'll get to the answer of how God can do this. The hint, though, for next week is that God will judge the Babylonians as well. But the point that I want to make today is just this, that we have to remind ourselves that God is at work in our lives even when we don't fully understand what He is accomplishing or doing. Do you ever read the newspaper and have no thought of God at all? Do you ever watch the news on television and have no thought in your mind come across that God is somehow involved doing something in the process of this? It's easy just to forget about it and not to ask, where are you in this, Lord? But this passage reveals to us that God is doing things that we would not believe if we were even told. And our job as Christians is simply to live by faith, which is one theme of Habakkuk, the just shall live by faith. And is to live by faith and trust that God is somehow, some way, some situation beyond what I can even fathom at work in this. I don't know what God's up to in this day. I'm told by verse 5, I probably wouldn't believe it if God told me. But national church leaders in the U.S. are talking about what are the long-term effects, estimates about church attendance and such, and going from the future. One pretty widespread estimate is that at the end of all COVID, when that's all said and done, that they estimate that there'll be 20 or 30% less people going to church permanently. That's just a given, a done. They're done forever. You can blame the government. We like to do that, so why not? We could maybe they mishandled COVID, or maybe we could blame the news media. We like to do that too for hyping it up. And maybe there's some blame to go. But even they are not outside of God's providential hand. What is God doing in His church in America? Is He purifying it? Is He pruning it? Is He showing where the true hope lies? He says in verse 5, I'm doing a work in your day, just like in Habakkuk's day. I assume the same is true today, that you wouldn't believe it if I told you. But then in verse 12, this is where the hope comes in. He says there that God is the Lord, capital L-O-R-D. That's the name of God Himself, Yahweh. The promise, covenant-keeping God. You can cling to Him. He's going to be faithful to keep His promise to redeem. It also says in verse 12 that God is everlasting. It means that God is not going to change. He's not going anywhere. He's going to be there. He says also in verse 12 that He's ordained them as judgment, the Babylonians. He's ordained your situation that you're facing, allowed it in your life for His glory, for your good. And God is also a rock. Rocks don't move. They're stable, firm. And I think one of the biggest steps of growth that as Christians we need to make is when we start to realize that in spite of the present appearances, God is still very much at work in our lives. Even if the doctor gives me the diagnosis I didn't want to hear, even if I lose my job and wonder where the next paycheck's going to come from, even if I have a child that has some sort of sickness, or maybe they're wandering spiritually in their faith, even if I have a spouse who, for whatever reason, is no longer with me, even if life is taking some twists and some turns that I really wish were not happening, the reality is that God is still very much at work in our lives, and we can rest in the reality that God is the same today. So even when God seems absent, He is still working in ways that we would struggle to believe if told. And the place, of course, where we see that the most clearly in the Scripture is not in Habakkuk, it's actually in the New Testament. It's at the cross. On Good Friday and on Saturday, the disciples thought the Jesus run was over. It was done. And they were very surprised by Sunday morning. But God was doing a work in their days which they did not understand, even though they were foretold about it. And so I just ask you today, where are you struggling to trust God right now? Culturally, individually, your future, your health, the nation, your economic well-being. Though God might seem absent, He's not. He's not. So cry out to Him in prayer. Even complain a little bit to Him in prayer. Where are you, God? I just can't see you. Help me. And trust that He will work in ways that we'll understand only fully in eternity. Let's pray. Father, thank you for Habakkuk and his courage to walk through those days that you gave him. And I pray and ask for us as we live in some pretty strange days ourselves, on the levels of individuals and individual stories, and also on the level of the culture. I pray that we would not be given to lament with as those who grieve with no hope. Lord, we want to grieve with hope. Lament the momentaries, knowing that you're sovereign over the big pictures of all things. And I pray, Lord, that you would help us just to be people who are faithful to you in the midst of this, trusting that you're going to do something that we wouldn't even understand if you told us right now.